Marie Antoinette, Part 2, The Myth. You are holding a pamphlet. It's Paris, 1789. The paper is cheap. The ink is still slightly wet. On the cover, there is an illustration of a woman. She is supposed to be the Queen of France. She is naked. She is surrounded by men and women in explicit poses. Her face is contorted in exaggerated pleasure. This is Marie Antoinette.
According to this pamphlet, none of it is real. Not one act described on these pages actually happened. The people depicted are fabricated. The scenes are invented. The entire thing is fiction, political fiction, designed to make you feel something very specific. Disgust, rage, a certainty that this woman deserves to die. And here's the thing, it worked. In Part 1, we saw how Marie Antoinette was stripped of her identity at 14, placed inside the most surveilled system in Europe, and spent 7 years in a marriage she could not consummate, failing at the one task that justified her existence at Versailles. In this part, we're going to see what happened when she finally became a mother. And then we're going to see how everything she did, including becoming a mother, was turned against her. Because this is not a story about a queen who made mistakes. This is a story about how a propaganda machine was built, piece by piece, over 15 years, to transform a real woman into a monster. And how that monster became more useful to France than the woman ever could have been. If you haven't watched Part 1, go back and watch it now. The context matters. Everything in this episode builds on what came before. In the spring of 1777, Marie Antoinette's brother Joseph arrived in France. He had come because the situation was becoming desperate. 7 years. 7 years of an unconsummated marriage. 7 years of no heir. 7 years of whispers spreading through every court in Europe. Joseph met with both his sister and Louis XVI. He was blunt. He was direct. He assessed the situation with the frankness that only a brother and an emperor could combine. In a letter to his own brother Leopold, Joseph described Louis's approach to intimacy in clinical, almost absurd detail. The young king, Joseph wrote, would attempt the act, remain motionless for approximately 2 minutes, and then withdraw, and bid goodnight. That was it. That was the extent of it. For 7 years. Joseph's intervention, exactly what he said, we don't know, had the desired effect. The marriage was consummated in August 1777, and on December 19th, 1778, Marie Antoinette gave birth to her first child, a daughter, Marie-Thérèse Charlotte, known at court as Madame Royale, not a son. For a monarchy that required a male heir, a daughter was a relief, but not a solution. The succession was still uncertain. Marie Antoinette needed a son. But something else happened when she became a mother. Something that contradicted every version of her that would later be constructed. She loved her children. Deeply. Visibly, in ways that were unusual for a queen of this era. When Marie-Thérèse was born, Marie Antoinette reportedly said something that has been recorded by multiple sources. A son, she said, would have been the property of the state. A daughter would be hers. Think about what that sentence reveals. She understood, even at 23, that a male heir belonged to France, to the system, to the dynasty. But a daughter she could keep. A daughter she could love as a person, not as a political instrument. The irony is brutal. Marie Antoinette, who had been a political instrument herself since she was 11 years old, understood exactly what the system did to children, and she wanted to protect her daughter from it. A son followed in 1781, Louis Joseph, the Dauphin. Then another son in 1785, and a daughter, Sophie, in 1787, who would die in infancy. Marie Antoinette became, by all accounts, a devoted mother. She spent time with her children. She was involved in their education. She was, in the words of historians who have studied her closely, warmer and more present with her children than most queens of her era had been. And as she became a mother, something else shifted.
she became less extravagant. This is a fact that is almost entirely absent from the popular narrative, but it's documented. Through the 1780s, Marie Antoinette's spending decreased noticeably. She stopped buying elaborate jewelry. She stopped wearing the towering wigs that had defined her earlier years at court. She became, in the words of one historian, more circumspect with her dress and more frugal with her spending. She was changing, maturing, settling into a different version of herself. But it didn't matter, because by the time Marie Antoinette was becoming a quieter, more grounded woman, the story about her had already been written. And that story had a life of its own. Let's talk about how it started. The machinery of Marie Antoinette's destruction was not built in a single day. It was constructed gradually, over years, by multiple hands, for multiple reasons. Some of it came from inside Versailles. Some of it came from outside. And almost none of it was about Marie Antoinette at all. The first layer was court gossip. Versailles was a closed system with 10,000 people and almost no privacy. Everyone watched everyone. Loyalties shifted constantly. Factions formed and dissolved. Information was currency. Marie Antoinette had enemies at court from the very beginning. Some resented her simply for being Austrian, France's former enemy. Some resented her for the influence she had over the king. Some resented her for the way she challenged the rigid protocols that had governed court life for decades. The king's aunts, Louis XVI's father's sisters, were particularly hostile. They had guided Marie Antoinette into the Du Barry debacle in her first years at court. They continued to work against her throughout her time as queen. The king's brothers were another problem. The Count of Provence and the Count of Artois both believed they were more capable rulers than Louis XVI. They were jealous of his position. They were jealous of Marie Antoinette. And they had access to the same information networks that everyone else at court used. These disaffected nobles became, in the words of one historian, fertile sources for dirt on the queen. They fabricated stories. They circulated rumors. They fed information to the press. And the press was hungry. The second layer was the libelle. Libelles were pamphlets. Political pamphlets that attacked public figures, sometimes through satire, sometimes through fabricated scandal, sometimes through outright pornography. They had existed in France for decades. They targeted kings, ministers, aristocrats. They were illegal. The government tried to suppress them. Publishers were threatened with hanging. It didn't work. The business moved underground. Some publishers relocated to Holland or London, safely out of reach of French censors, and continued to print from there. By the 1770s and 1780s, these pamphlets had become a significant force in French public life. France's literacy rate was rising fast, nearly doubling between the late 1600s and the 1780s. More people could read. More people were reading. And the pamphlets were cheap. Before 1789, Marie Antoinette was one of several targets. Historian Robert Darnton has estimated that in the 1780s, only about 1 in 10 libelles directly attacked her. But she was an easy target. She was female. She was foreign. She was fond of fashion. She had been slow to produce an heir, and she was strong-willed in a way that made men uncomfortable. Attacking the queen was also a way to attack the king, without doing so directly. If the queen was sexually corrupt, then the king was a cuckold. If the queen was politically scheming, then the king was weak. Every attack on Marie Antoinette was, underneath, an attack on the legitimacy of the monarchy itself. The libelles understood this instinctively. They exploited it relentlessly. The third layer, and the one that changed everything, was the diamond necklace affair. 1785. Marie Antoinette is 29 years old. She has 3 children. She has been queen for 11 years. And a confidence trickster named Jean de la Motte is about to destroy her. Here's what actually happened. 2 Parisian jewelers, Baumer and Bassange, had spent years trying to sell an extraordinarily expensive diamond necklace.
It had originally been commissioned by Louis XV for his mistress, Madame du Barry. When Louis XV died, du Barry was banished from court. The necklace went unsold. The jewelers tried to sell it to Marie Antoinette. She refused. Twice. The necklace was too expensive, and she did not want to be seen purchasing luxury items during a time of national financial difficulty. The necklace cost 1.6 million livres. To put that in perspective, that was an astronomical sum. The national debt of France was staggering, and the monarchy was already accused of fiscal irresponsibility. Marie Antoinette said no, but Jeanne de la Motte said yes. The Jeanne was a woman of minor noble birth who had descended into poverty and turned to confidence tricks to survive. Increasingly investigative, she had gained access to the court through a relationship with Cardinal de Rohan, a high-ranking clergyman who had previously served as French ambassador in Vienna. See, Marie Antoinette despised Rohan. He had behaved badly during his time in Vienna, and her mother had reported his conduct. Marie Antoinette had excluded him from her circle entirely. Rohan was desperate to regain her favor. Jeanne exploited this desperation masterfully. She convinced Rohan that she was a confidant of the queen. She promised to help him restore his reputation. She arranged what appeared to be a secret meeting between Rohan and Marie Antoinette in the gardens of Versailles, at night, in darkness, with a woman dressed to resemble the queen. A prostitute had been hired for the role. The woman in the garden handed Rohan a rose. She told him the past could be forgotten. Rohan believed it. Then Jeanne presented him with letters, forged in what appeared to be Marie Antoinette's handwriting, asking him to purchase the necklace secretly on the queen's behalf. She said Marie Antoinette could not be seen buying such an expensive item publicly during a time of national hardship. The letters were signed, Marie Antoinette de France. There was one detail that should have raised a red flag. French royals did not sign formal correspondence with their full names. They signed only with their baptismal names. Any ambassador, any diplomat would have known this. Rohan knew this. He had been an ambassador to Vienna. He had dealt with royals his entire life. He chose not to question it. He wanted to believe. Rohan negotiated the purchase. The necklace was delivered to his estate. He gave it to Jeanne, and Jeanne disappeared with it. The necklace was broken apart and the diamonds were sold individually, most of them ending up in London. When the jewelers eventually asked for payment and received nothing, the scandal broke open. Marie Antoinette was informed of the situation. She had never seen the necklace. She had never written those letters. She had never met with Rohan in the garden. She had played absolutely no role in any of it. But here is what mattered. Her name had been used. Her signature had been forged. Her reputation had been weaponized by someone else entirely. And in a France that was already suspicious of its queen, already fed by years of whispers and gossip, the scandal confirmed what people wanted to believe, that Marie Antoinette was a corrupt spendthrift. That she was scheming behind the king's back. That she could not be trusted. The trial that followed was public. It was sensational. It involved forged letters, prostitutes, secret garden meetings, and a missing necklace worth more than most people would see in a lifetime. Cardinal Rohan was acquitted. Jeanne de la Motte was convicted, sentenced to life imprisonment, flogged, and branded. Marie Antoinette was found to be entirely innocent. It made no difference. The French diplomat Talleyrand had predicted it perfectly. "Watch out for this diamond necklace business," he said at the time. "It may well rock the throne of France." He was right. After 1785, Marie Antoinette's appearances in public all but ceased. Her reputation, already fragile, was shattered. Pamphlets flooded Paris, speculating about her involvement, mocking her, accusing her of conspiracy. She was nicknamed Madame Deficit, the woman responsible for France's debt. She had refused the necklace, but history would remember her as having bought it. And this is the mechanism we need to understand. This is how the myth was built, not through one dramatic event, but through accumulation. layer after layer of gossip, rumor, fabrication, and misinterpretation. Each one small, each one individually survivable. But together they created something that no amount of truth could undo. Now let's talk about the Petit Trianon. In part 1, we mentioned that Louis XVI gave Marie Antoinette a small chateau on the grounds of Versailles in 1774. The Petit Trianon, a place where she could have some privacy, some relief from the suffocating protocols of court. Marie Antoinette transformed the Petit Trianon into her sanctuary. She redesigned the gardens in the English style, wilder, more natural, less rigid than the formal French gardens of the main palace. She commissioned the construction of the Hameau de la Reine, the Queen's Hamlet, a small cluster of cottages built around an artificial lake, designed to resemble a Norman village. The hamlet had a working farm, real animals, a dairy, gardens that produced food for the royal table. It was managed by a professional farmer named Valie Boussard, with a full staff of gardeners, herdsmen, and laborers. Marie Antoinette visited the hamlet to walk through the gardens, to host small, intimate gatherings with close friends, to oversee the estate, to educate her children about agriculture and the land. She dressed simply there. A muslin gown, a straw hat. No panniers, no elaborate wigs, no court dress. This was, for Marie Antoinette, the closest thing to freedom she had ever known. And it was immediately turned into ammunition. The image that has survived in popular memory, Marie Antoinette playing peasant at her model village while real peasants starved across France, is, according to historians who have studied the primary sources closely, largely a myth. There is no contemporary evidence that Marie Antoinette and her entourage dressed up as shepherdesses or pretended to milk cows. The Château de Versailles itself, in its official documentation, states this directly. The image of the Queen playing at being farmers is a deeply entrenched and inaccurate myth. The hamlet was a real farm. It produced real food. It was a fashionable concept among the aristocracy at the time. Model farms built along principles espoused by the physiocrats, a school of economic thought popular in 18th century France. The Prince of Condé had built a similar hamlet at Chantilly in 1774. Marie Antoinette's was not unique, but none of that mattered to her enemies. What mattered was the image. The Queen in a simple dress, walking through a pretty village with real animals, while France was drowning in debt and the people were going hungry. It was perfect ammunition. It required no embellishment. The contrast was already there. The label knew exactly how to exploit it. By the late 1780s, the pamphlets targeting Marie Antoinette had escalated dramatically. They accused her of everything. Adultery with the Count of Artois, the king's own brother, with the Swedish ambassador, Axel von Fersen, with women, with multiple partners simultaneously. They accused her of being a lesbian, of being a nymphomaniac, of seeking constant sexual satisfaction that her husband could not provide. They accused her of political espionage, of secretly feeding information to Austria, her homeland, undermining France from within. They accused her of poisoning, of financial corruption, of manipulating the king like a puppet. They accused her of incest. Let that land for a moment. They accused the Queen of France of incest. And they accused her of being responsible for France's financial ruin. The national debt, which had been accumulated over decades, through wars, through the costs of maintaining Versailles, through the structural failures of the entire fiscal system, was blamed on her spending. Madame Deficit. As if one woman's wardrobe could bankrupt a nation. Some of these accusations had a kernel of truth buried inside layers of fabrication. Marie Antoinette did have a close relationship with Axel von Fersen, the Swedish nobleman. Whether it was romantic, historians still debate. The letters between them suggest something beyond friendship. But the accusations in the pamphlets bore no relationship to reality. They were fantasies. Extreme, pornographic, deliberately degrading fantasies. And they were everywhere. The historian Robert Darnton, who has studied this period more deeply than almost anyone, described what happened to Marie Antoinette between 1789 and her execution as having no parallel in the history of vilification. Pamphlets were sold on the streets of Paris, in the gardens of the Tuileries, right under the king's window. The real Marie Antoinette, the woman who had become a quieter, more devoted mother through the 1780s, who had reduced her spending, who had been entirely innocent in the diamond necklace affair, disappeared beneath the fiction. And the fiction was what France needed. Because here's the thing that is almost never discussed when people talk about Marie Antoinette. The French Revolution was not caused by Marie Antoinette. France in the 1780s was a country on the edge of collapse. The national debt was catastrophic. The tax system was broken. The aristocracy paid almost nothing, and the burden fell on the people who could least afford it. There had been wars. There had been famines. There had been decades of mismanagement by multiple kings. The Ancien Regime, the entire system of monarchy and aristocratic privilege, was the problem. Not one woman, not even one king. But revolutions need symbols. They need faces to put on the enemy. They need someone concrete to direct their rage toward. Louis XVI was too mild, too sympathetic, too obviously well-meaning, even if he was hopelessly incompetent. Marie Antoinette was perfect. She was foreign, Austrian, the enemy's daughter in the popular imagination. She was a woman, and a woman who had, in the eyes of the libelles, transgressed every boundary that women were supposed to respect. She was too sexual, too political, too powerful. She was a mother, and the accusations against her would eventually include the most horrifying charge of all. But we're not there yet. What matters now is this. By 1789, Marie Antoinette was no longer a person in the public imagination. She was a symbol of everything that was wrong with France, of excess, of corruption, of foreign manipulation, of a system that had betrayed its people. The woman who had been stripped naked on an island in the Rhine at 14, who had spent 7 years trying to fulfill the one duty that justified her existence, who had become a mother and changed quietly, invisibly, in ways no pamphlet would ever report. I know woman was gone. I talked remained was the myth, and myths are much harder to kill than people. In part 3, we're going to see what happened when the revolution came to Versailles, how Marie Antoinette was captured, imprisoned, and put on trial, how the accusations in the pamphlets became the charges in a courtroom, and how the woman who had been stripped of her identity at 14 was stripped of it one final time, on a scaffold, in front of thousands of people. The trial of Marie Antoinette was not a trial of a person.